Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for our Hot Topics series. I'm Melissa Scanlon. I'm the director of the Environmental Law Center, and we will see you here throughout the summer, every Tuesday and Thursday from 12 to 1. We today have the pleasure of having our energy scholar with us to give our Hot Topic lecture. I'm pleased to welcome Shalanda Baker. She is a professor in the environmental law faculty at the University of Hawaii, and she's the environmental law program faculty advisor there. She not only is our distinguished scholar here this summer in energy, but she has a Fulbright for the fall and spring. Fall and spring in Mexico. So she is she's recognized internationally as a scholar. She teaches international environmental law, renewable energy law, sustainable development, administrative law, and other related courses in energy and international development. And her research is really focused on large energy infrastructure project developments, including renewable energy. And she's looking at indigenous rights and energy justice issues and the effect of this kind of infrastructure development on the environment and on the rights of people. She served as an Air Force officer prior to her honorable discharge under the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, and then became a vocal advocate to repeal that policy. So thank you for that. Following her graduation from law school, Professor Baker clerked for Justice Roderick Ireland of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. She also worked as a corporate and project finance associate for Bingham McCutcheon, initially in Boston and then working in Japan. She holds a BS from the U.S. Air Force Academy, a JD from Northeastern University's School of Law, and an LLM from the University of Wisconsin Law School. So please join me in welcoming Professor Baker.
Thanks, Melissa, for that wonderful welcome. And I just want to say I was promised summer, so I'm not sure what's going on here. But I am really delighted to be here. As Melissa said, I come from Hawaii, and I'm hoping that today I'll get to share some of the stories. We like to say in Hawaii, we talk stories. So I think I'll spend the next 30 or so minutes talking story with you, and then hopefully we can have a little bit of an exchange. I understand that today is a pretty big day on the energy front here in Vermont. Maybe that's where a lot of folks are over at the State House in Montpelier. But there's a debate going on around the siting of renewable energy in your state. But there are also a lot of parallels, and hopefully I can learn from you about what's going on here in the state of Vermont. So I also wanted to thank, in addition to Melissa, Michael Dworkin for the invitation to be the energy scholar this summer. I've had a long love affair with this law school. It's a wonderful place, and I'm just delighted to be here for an extended period. I also want to thank Jenny Thomas, who's here in the room, and Courtney Collins, who have been wonderful in setting up all of the logistics and making sure that I'm comfortable. So I am, despite the cold and the rain that greeted me on Sunday, but here I am. So as Melissa said, my research focuses on indigenous rights, renewable energy development, and more recently, community energy, community-based energy solutions. So all of those issues are relevant to what's going on in Hawaii. Let's see. So today I'd like to, again, share a little bit of the story of what's going on in Hawaii, the renewable energy landscape, the broader energy landscape. And then I want to position us within 3 inquiries that sort of frame how we move forward with the renewable energy transition in the state. And then finally, I'd like to introduce the concept of energy justice. And I know that on this campus, energy justice is of interest to many of you. The 3 questions that frame the core of the energy dialectic in Hawaii and my talk today are, first, how should clean, affordable forms of energy be produced? Second, how should energy be distributed? And third, who should own our energy systems? So production, distribution, and ownership are the 3 inquiries that frame where we're going. So Hawaii is my new home. I joined the faculty at the University of Hawaii last August and rapidly learned a lot about the state. As you can see from these images, it is a beautiful state, and the landscape there is really otherworldly. There are abundant natural resources, particularly energy resources, so we have abundant sunshine. Sunshines nearly every day in nearly every part of the state. We have wind that blows constantly in the form of trade winds. We have geothermal resources. You can see there, I think that image is from the Big Island of Hawaii. But we have geothermal resources spread throughout the Hawaiian Islands. And we also have ocean energy resources. And increasingly, we're looking to the ocean as a source of energy, both in the form of wave energy, but also for offshore wind development, which has arisen recently over the last few months as a possibility in Hawaii. So with these abundant resources, we also have a renewable energy transformation that is taking hold in the state. And it is well underway. And our policymakers, our energy sector, are really trying to catch up with that revolution. And it seems that the pathway forward with respect to renewable energy development will necessarily require a structural transformation of our energy systems. And before I get into that, though, I want to talk a little bit about power. Okay. So before we talk about energy, I want to talk about power. Before the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Queen, Queen Liliuokalani, and annexation of the Hawaiian Kingdom by the United States in 1898, Hawaii had power. In 1886, Iolani Palace, which is there, became one of the world's first royal palaces to be lit by electricity after the installation by King Kalakaua, who was there, of a small electric system consisting of a steam engine and a dynamo for incandescent lamps. So we were already on the front edge of electricity way back in the late 1800s. And by 1888, electricity generated by hydroelectric turbines illuminated Honolulu streets. And by 1890, nearly 800 Honolulu homes had electricity, along with a handful of businesses. In 1892, just a few years after the first electric light shone on the Royal Palace, Hawaiian Electric Industries, our state's maligned and sometimes beloved investor-owned utility, was born. And so for the past 125 years, tension has really marked the relationship between our investor-owned utility and the public. Economics form the bulk of this tension, or the bulk of the basis for the tension. And recently, economics have become a big issue in our state. So according to the Energy Information Administration, in 2015, our state paid an average of 33 cents per kilowatt hour for electricity. So that's nearly double that of the second highest jurisdiction, Alaska, which comes in at around 17 cents per kilowatt hour. And just by way of comparison, here in Vermont, you pay around 15 cents. I've seen 15 to 17 cents per kilowatt hour as your average. So we're still double that. And to put it in real terms, because many people don't think in kilowatt hours, I think probably you, Mark, think in kilowatt hours, but a lot of people don't think in kilowatt hours. In real terms, the average monthly electricity bill for our state is $185 a month. And that's compared to the national average of around $58 per month. So that just puts it in real economic terms. And these electricity costs are due in large part to the state's reliance on oil and coal, both which are imported to the island for electricity. Okay. In 2013, according to our state's energy office, Hawaii relied on oil for 70% of our electricity generation and coal for 14%. So we are a fossil fuel driven electricity sector, a fossil fuel driven economy. In many ways, we rely on tourists who fly in from Japan, from China, from here to visit our lovely islands. But we rely on fossil fuels for electricity generation. By contrast, if we look at the United States as a whole, only 1% of the electricity in the country is generated using oil. So that's a fascinating kind of dynamic. Okay, so because of our economics, so we pay, again, 3 times the national average for electricity, In the early 2000s to the mid 2000s, we underwent a seismic transition of our electricity sector, beginning with rooftop solar installations. So the combination of high electricity rates and the availability of relatively affordable rooftop solar photovoltaic units have contributed to a transformation, as I said, of our electricity sector. And a lot of that has happened primarily over the last 4 years. The economics have become really attractive in the last 5 years. Under our net energy metering program, affectionately known as NEM, homeowners receive an initial tax credit for solar installation, as well as retail rates for electricity that they produce and supply to the grid. And despite the initial capital investment that people have to pay in order to get the solar panels on their rooftops, it pays off, right? It pencils out due to the high cost of electricity. And eventually, many people in the state pay nothing for electricity due to the amount that they're generating. So this number is actually low. This was a 2015 number of 12% of total ratepayers have rooftop solar. It's now, I think, around 15%. Some of the data that's unofficial has come out around 15%, and that's compared to a U.S. average of 0.5% rooftop solar penetration. So Hawaii leads the nation in penetration of rooftop solar. And of course, our utility, our 125-year-old investor-owned utility, HECO, cried foul. And they said the widespread adoption of rooftop solar hurts low-income ratepayers. Moreover, renters and condominium high-rise dwellers are not able to have rooftop solar in their buildings. And they're left to pay the fixed costs of maintaining the grid. So that's a debate that is alive and well in Hawaii. Second, they said that we can't manage all of this variable renewable energy on the grid. And so some of you were here on Tuesday and got to hear Chris Root speak from Belco and talk about some of the challenges with managing variable renewable energy. That is real in Hawaii, and our utility said our lines were designed for electricity to flow one direction, not two directions, and we can't manage all of this variable energy coming back into the grid from distributed sources, and that the aging grid infrastructure of Hawaii is only designed for electricity to flow, again, one way. And rather than innovate, our utility solution was to simply slow the integration of rooftop solar on the grid, as well as actively advocate for the end of our rooftop solar program. More on NEM in a moment, so this is just a placeholder. Okay. So our Public Utilities Commission has been known, or has recently become known, as one of the most innovative public utilities commissions in the country. And in April of 2014, just a few months before I joined the faculty, the Public Utilities Commission issued 4 orders and an unprecedented statement attached to one order in an exhibit entitled Inclinations on the Future of Hawaii's Electric Utilities. And so the 4 orders were issued in response to a lot of things, but one of the primary emphasis for the orders was the backlog of photovoltaic interconnection on our grid. And so in this order, or in this series of orders and the inclinations, the PUC issued a rare public rebuke of our utility and admonished the utility for failing to adopt a modern utility business model. And I joined the faculty just after this. So just for those of you who can't read it, the commission is compelled to offer the following perspectives on the vision, business strategies, and regulatory policy changes required to align the HECO company's business model with customer interests and state public policy goals. The commission is compelled because the HECO companies failed to articulate a sustainable business model in the intervening time period since this directive was set forth by the commission almost a year ago in Order 31288. So this was a big deal. This made national headlines, actually. It's rare for a PUC or Public Service Board to issue that kind of public review. And so this is when the fun really began. As I mentioned, I joined the faculty just a few months later in August. Just after I joined the faculty in December of 2014, our utility, Hawaiian Electric Industries, and NextEra Energy, a Florida-based utility giant, announced a $4.3 billion merger, whereby NextEra would purchase HEI's operational subsidiaries that service the state. So we have a parent company, HEI, which owns HECO, Hawaiian Electric Company. HECO services part of our grid, all of our grid in Oahu, and then 2 other subsidiaries service the remaining islands. And I have a slide on that in a little bit. But essentially, this would be ownership, a full ownership by an outside entity of our utility. And this was also a big deal. The transaction, the $4.3 billion transaction, would be the largest in our state's history. And a record 28 parties filed for intervener status in the merger docket, with near uniform rejection of the outside bid for the state's utility. The governor as well has come out against the merger and has been outspoken in connection with the utility's plan to import LNG as a bridge fuel to Hawaii, a plan that is deeply connected to this proposed merger. The PUC is currently evaluating over 110,000 pages. For those future lawyers, this is a job that you could have. 110,000 pages of written testimony filed in the docket. And the PUC also held a historic 21 days of public testimony, public hearing in this with the 28 interveners. And that was also live streamed. So this is a real issue. This is a kitchen table issue in Hawaii, and it's a big deal. And the public hearings were broadcast in November, December, and February. And we should hear from the PUC later this month as to whether or not this merger goes through. Okay. And so either way, the merger has really raised several questions regarding the best pathway forward for renewable energy development in the state. And in particular, the merger has raised a question of whether an investor-owned utility or another form of electric utility, such as a cooperative or municipal power provider, should shepherd that path forward to renewable energy. And in this past legislative session, the legislature actually authorized $1.2 million to our state energy office to study that question. Because the merger, again, has raised all sorts of issues around the structural concerns related to our utility. So 6 months after the merger was announced, our governor signed a bill whereby we now have a 100% RPS. So 100% of our energy by the year 2045 must be produced using renewable energy. So this raises the stakes a little bit in our energy landscape. And this is obviously the most aggressive renewable energy goal in the country this time. The same day, our governor, back in June of last year, so just about a year ago, signed a landmark community solar bill, which was highly anticipated. So this is a community-based renewable energy bill that allows communities to participate in the generation of renewable energy in response, in large part, to the widespread proliferation of rooftop solar by individual homeowners. And so the legislation was framed to allow our utility to design the tariff. Yeah, okay. So what did it look like? Well, these are 4 potential options that have been raised by the Department of Energy. So community energy, as you probably know here in Vermont, is a big deal, right? It's the next wave. It's a really interesting way for communities to engage in the renewable energy transition. But there are lots of different options. You can aggregate your meters and sell your renewable energy to the grid. You can have an on-site system where everyone in your building shares in the renewable energy generation and the benefits from it. Or there are so many different innovative financial models that are now coming out regarding community energy. Our utility designed one of the most, I think, regressive community renewable energy programs that is available, and that is utility scale generation in which community members own a stake. So it's more of the same, big production, right? Not community scale, but they own an interest. And this is beneficial in many ways. However, there were so many options along the spectrum, and our utility design was this. So in response, our PUC actually said, this is not the best way, and they opened a docket on it back in October. So another open, hot issue in Hawaii. Okay, so the NEM story, I said I would return to it. The NEM story is not over. And we have a docket open called the Distributed Energy Resources Docket, where our PUC is looking at ways to integrate more renewables on our grid. And in phase 1, they effectively ended our net energy metering program. And this was in October. We were the first state in the country to end it. So we've been most aggressive, but now we've ended it. Nevada shortly followed. There's some litigation going on in Nevada related to that. But essentially, they ended the program and designed a two-tiered system whereby folks can self-supply, so put rooftop units on their roofs and self-supply just to meet their own energy needs. They can't feed any energy back into the grid under that. And they can grid supply. In grid supply, they would be compensated at a much lower rate for the electricity they generate. So it's not really NIM. Okay, but that's phase 1. That could change again over the next couple years in Hawaii. So stay tuned. So it is within this context that we take up the 3 questions I initially posed. So, how should energy be produced? More importantly, how should clean, affordable forms of energy be produced? This question is already on the minds of communities across our islands. And as you might imagine, as I showed before, our islands have an abundance of wind, solar, geothermal power, wave power, and hydropower. With our 100% renewable energy goal, the utility and developers have also begun to develop and offer a few solutions on how to reach our 100% goal. More utility scale wind and solar development has of course been proposed, and just yesterday our utility issued a request for interest for development of more utility scale generation on our islands. So we're islands, we don't have a lot of land, and we're not food sustainable either, and this is a food energy nexus. By some estimates, we only have 3 days worth of food on the islands at any one time. So there's a little bit of tension there with developing ag land for renewable energy development. But utility scale wind and solar development are already on the table. There's also been a proposal that has died in the past but is sort of being revived, which is an inter-island cable linking smaller, more rural islands with energy, with renewable energy to connect economic centers such as Oahu and Maui with that power. And that's been controversial because many of our rural islands are predominantly native Hawaiian and pay the highest electricity costs as well in the state, and face a slew of other development-related challenges like GMOs and things like that. So there are some issues with that proposal. The community-based renewable energy model, which is proposed, involves individual participation in utility-scale renewable energy projects. So that's a way to share in the ownership, but again, this has been proposed by our utility. The utility has also proposed a $340 million smart grid to modernize our grid so that our meters can talk to the utility. And the cost of that would be passed through to ratepayers in the form of higher electricity rates, just because of the structure of electricity, of the relationship between utilities and regulators and customers. There has also been widespread promotion of the NextEra transaction. Again, our utility is saying the only way we can do that is if we have access to cheap capital. NextEra, the Florida-based company, has access to cheap capital, so we should absolutely the PUC should absolutely allow this merger because it is in the public interest to do so. And so we're still not sure on how energy should be produced, particularly how clean, affordable forms of energy should be produced. Second question is, how should energy be distributed? Again, that frames our inquiry, frames how we're thinking about the renewable energy transition. And as to the distribution question, the utility appears poised to consolidate its power and continue along the path of centralized generation. The utility, in its bid to end NIM, was able to capitalize on the market imperfections within the NIM system rather than try to innovate around it. So it is true that the program, our net energy metering program, was a boon to certain homeowners, but the new restrictions on interconnecting rooftop solar customers would mean that those with the means to defect in Hawaii will defect. So the economics of grid defection in Hawaii are real. because we pay so much for electricity. So what does that mean then for low-income ratepayers and the stability of our electricity and energy system? Batteries are also becoming more popular, and we have lots of folks who are exploring battery options in Hawaii. So the same reasons that made rooftop solar so attractive and popular in Hawaii make battery systems popular. And I think we're going to see another wave of innovation on that front as well. Some folks are thinking about microgrid systems and how different communities can become generators of their own power. We have some restrictions on developing microgrids, which is small-scale generation, community-scale generation, and certain areas at the legislative level, at the statutory level, and we're working on that as well. So the final question is, who should own energy, and who should own our energy systems? Well, the proposed merger actually brought to surface long simmering tensions between the utility and ratepayers. It was never a love fest between our utility and ratepayers. And almost immediately after the December 2015 announcement, stakeholders began to raise some really hard questions regarding the best ownership models for utilities. And so one of the questions is the investor-owned model the best model to help us reach 100% renewable energy? Especially given that utility shareholders are guaranteed a reasonable return on the utility's investments. Is a rural electricity co-op or a rural electric co-op model better suited for the transition, given that it is member owned and operated, and there is little incentive to gold plate investments? And we do have an example of an electric co-op in Hawaii, the Kauai electricity, the Kauai electric utility. I'm losing the name all of a sudden. I'm not old enough to forget things, but but I am losing the name. But it is on Kauai, and it has been very popular among its ratepayers. And the other question is, should municipalities like the city and county of Honolulu examine the municipal power provider model, which has been so successful in places like Sacramento and Austin? And I know you have some munis here in Vermont as well. Or should the state be considering something altogether different? To operate its island grids, such as a distributed system operator that simply charges a fee for market participants to send their power to the grid. All of this is live. This is happening right now. Okay, but these questions, so I can talk about Hawaii for hours, but these questions are really no different than questions being asked all over the country in pockets. So some of these questions are on the forefront in Boulder, in Arizona, in Nevada. But in Hawaii, we're getting all of them at once. So we're having to grapple with this complexity within this landscape. And there seems to be a lot of urgency in this moment. And the chaos actually provides an opportunity to consider justice. It not only provides an opportunity to consider justice, it requires us to consider justice. And in particular, we can use a theoretical framing of energy justice to answer the hard questions, these three hard questions that we face. So what is energy justice? Energy justice is still gaining its theoretical legs in the United States. Scholars of international development, such as Lakshman Guruswamy in Colorado, have viewed energy justice in terms of energy poverty. So essentially, energy justice is a lack of access to energy. And based on my review of the literature, though, I like that model, but I'd like to expand it a little bit more. Based on my review of the literature, including texts by Benjamin Sovacool and Michael Dworkin, who are here, I've come to frame energy justice as an umbrella term that incorporates three principles. The first principle is climate justice. And so energy justice requires the assessment and mitigation of climate change vulnerability and the creation of energy infrastructure that leaves us more secure in the face of climate change. So climate justice is an existing framework that many scholars have been working on for the last decade or so, trying to mitigate vulnerability for the most vulnerable folks around the world. And in Hawaii, this prong of the energy justice stool is of particular importance. When we think of production, our state must tackle head-on the climate change question. Many of the power plants that we have are located at the water line, and we rely on centralized generation facilities to power our islands, right? All that coal and oil, a lot of it is on the coast. Our state is also particularly vulnerable to climate change as sea levels rise and the frequency of tropical storms and hurricanes increases. Energy justice thus requires exploration of decentralized, clean generation that mitigates vulnerability, particularly for poor and low-income communities for whom a power loss or an outage could have lasting financial consequences. So this is the first principle of energy justice. The second principle is environmental justice. Again, a long-standing field of environmental law. And within the environmental justice frame, poor communities and communities of color have really given this term its meaning, as they are often situated at the epicenter of environmentally degraded energy developments and have little say in the siting of energy projects. Environmental justice theories, models, and practices assist such communities in remedying harm and preventing such harms from occurring in the first place. Energy justice requires the disruption of old patterns concerning siting of energy facilities, minimizing the scale of projects, and providing effective pathways for community-scale renewable energy development. Further, energy justice requires that the benefits and burdens of energy production, delivery, and distribution are equally shared. In Hawaii, this means providing regulatory and policy pathways for meaningful opportunities to engage in community energy or community-scale energy development, community-driven energy planning and processes. So I realized I didn't actually show you or tell you what I was showing you. This is Waikiki. They actually bring sand into Waikiki because it's eroding so quickly. And we have hotels that are, abutting the shore there that are facing some water issues, right? With every major storm we have, there's sewage that flows into the ocean. And this is our cash cow. So they shut down Waikiki and other beaches in Hawaii in the fall due to some serious storms that came through. So we have some infrastructure challenges. The second image I'm showing you here is the Kahe coal plant, which is on the Waianae coast of Hawaii, of Oahu. So Waianae is a traditional environmental justice community. A lot of Native Hawaiian folks live in that area. A lot of folks of color live in that region, but it's predominantly low income. And there is an oil, a biomass, and a coal facility all within a very small corridor. Waianae is also being targeted for renewable energy development. Large solar projects are now going to Waianae, again, without a lot of community engagement. So environmental justice, bless you, we often think of environmental justice as only being about dirty development. But environmental justice also is about the footprint and the scale of energy development. So even when we're talking about solar or utility scale wind, there are environmental issues that we should be, environmental justice issues that we should be thinking about. So the final piece of my three-legged stool, and if you disagree, I invite your disagreement on how I frame energy justice, is energy democracy. And energy democracy, to me, is one of the most interesting pieces of this. We already have established and long lines of scholarship related to climate justice and environmental justice. But energy democracy is something that we don't really know a lot about. Based on the literature and sort of how things are unfolding, energy democracy is essentially engagement in the process of shaping your energy system. It's a rather new concept. So there isn't a lot out there. And for over 100 years, we've had the investor-owned utility model that has governed how we design our energy systems. And that was necessary. We had poles and wires, again, and centralized energy facilities that generated electricity that would be sent through those poles and wires. But now we are in this transition. And so the question being asked is really rooted in energy democracy. How do we shape what our energy system looks like? And so as the renewable energy revolution continues to take hold, new models, which are easily and readily available to us in mass, are proliferating. And it has become increasingly clear in Hawaii and other jurisdictions that the investor-owned utility model may not be able to yield enough to make way for these new models. So what does that leave us with? I think there are a lot of questions as to what the utility of the future will look like. But no matter what, in this energy transition, energy justice requires that communities become the locus of power. It requires engagement by communities. Community energy planning must become a common feature of life and governance to allow for greater democratization of our energy systems. And in this new paradigm, communities become generators, participating in a diverse local or regional energy market. Finally, communities in this energy justice and energy democracy frame are beginning to choose their own pathways, their own best pathways toward justice. So ultimately, we do not know what energy justice will look like in Hawaii in 2045, when 100% of our electricity is generated using renewable energy resources. Moreover, energy justice in Hawaii is not energy justice in Vermont, Massachusetts, or New York. The principles, though, of energy justice can provide a guide for the transition. They can provide markers along the way, but they don't give us the destination. We must do the work. We must apply these principles. And I'm so delighted to be in Hawaii, raising these questions, working to develop answers, and standing beside communities who are seeking their own models and their own answers, and seeking to restore power during this remarkable time in our national energy narrative. And just to give you a plug for a moment, for the plug. So this is I raised this slide for energy to illustrate energy democracy. Okay, so KIUC is our co-op. This is Kauai. HECO is our investor-owned utility that runs the grid, owns a lot of the resources in Oahu. Maui Electric Company is in charge of Lanai, Molokai, a very rural island, Maui, and Ko'olawi, which doesn't really have any electricity on it. It was a bombing range for the US government for many years. And then Helco is the Big Island's utility. So in each of these places, energy democracy is taking hold. So we can start with Helco. On the Big Island, which is a predominantly rural island, all of the Hawaiian islands can fit into the Big Island of Hawaii. We can experience the 4 seasons in one day here. The folks there, once the merger was announced in December of 2015, said, how do we take charge of our utility? So they're actively pursuing conversion to a co-op. I've done some work on Molokai. Maui County is the seat of governance for all of the 4 islands there. In Maui County, the mayor of Maui County said, once the merger was announced, he said, wait, let's actually explore other options. We don't necessarily know if the IOU is the best model for us. Molokai is thinking of breaking off altogether. Only 6,000 people live there. They think they could be a totally 100% renewable energy island. They have the lowest penetration of solar, rooftop solar, because of the variability associated with solar. And MECO has said, this is too destabilizing for the grid. You have to burn diesel. So Molokai is saying, we don't agree. We want to figure it out. I'm helping with some community energy planning there. HECO is Oahu, right? It's densely populated, and there are a lot of questions related to different sectors of the island of Oahu. This is my plug. I just started an energy justice program at the University of Hawaii. We're working with all of those communities I named to figure out pathways toward energy justice. So with that, we'll open it up to questions, and I did not follow my promise, which is to end with enough time, but I hope we have at least time for 2 questions, and I can stick around. Yes.
So I live in the Big Island.
Oh, great. Aloha.
So in Waukegan, kind of a rural town, but one of the stores decided to make a really large solar kind of grid. I'm just wondering how that would fall under all of this, because we took up a lot of space and it's quite large for our town. But I just didn't know if that was something that the energy from that would go to our town, or if they're selling it back to Helco, or if, like, how does that work?
So unless they're not connected to the grid, which I know a lot of people on the Big Island are not connected at all, and have batteries and other sophisticated systems or just go without power during certain times. If they are not connected to the grid, obviously that doesn't benefit your community at all. Most likely they are connected to the grid and to HELCO and had a pre-existing net metering relationship. So if the system is to a certain level, though, they may have had a special contract with HECO under a tariff, but most likely they're under the NEM program.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation.
Sure.
And I was curious to what extent in your energy justice framework model and also in your energy justice program that food justice might play a role, because given the massive amounts of energy consumption that are used in our energy or our food production system, and the tension that you briefly alluded to between the energy and the food sector.
Right.
And that's certainly true here in Vermont too, with solar siting competing for primary agricultural land. I'm just wondering if you've contemplated the role that food justice might also play in a framework like that.
Yeah, so the community groups I've been working with are focused on food and broader sustainability issues. Energy has actually become the next issue for them to consider. So, for example, on the North Shore of Oahu, it's a predominantly rural community. They house 1/5 of all of Oahu's renewable energy development. And they're worried, because they are a rural community, that they're going to be asked to house even more. We have a land use issue, though, and land ownership issue in Hawaii. Much of our land is owned by 3 or 4 major parties. Kamehameha Schools is the organization that is a trust for the Native Hawaiian people, but they own 1/5, I think, of all of the land in Hawaii, and they have been very aggressive in their framing of the trust, which is, we think we should be generating money as opposed to holding land in trust. And so they have leased and sold a lot of land for large-scale renewable energy rather than to ag folks, right? So there is tension, it's alive and well, and that conversation is happening in tandem. On Molokai, the group that I'm working with is called Sustainable Molokai. They have a really interesting energy assessment that they came up with a couple years ago, and they have been focused on food hubs, food security. Everything grows in Hawaii. I mean, the Big Island person here can vouch for that. But yet we import all of our food. I mean, this is ridiculous. We also have a large population, over 1 million. But by some studies, and according to some studies, we were sustainable. We had over 1 million Hawaiian residents before contact, and we were able to manage our land resources in a way that was effective and equitable. So no one went hungry. I don't want to idolize that period, but there are people saying that we can do it again. We have to change our systems. So there is a nexus, and that's a great question. Yeah.
Thank you for raising the issue of energy justice. In considering PJ communities, obviously there's a problem with permitting and the whole, all of the incidents that lead up to having those facilities placed in those areas. What can we start thinking about as future attorneys to try and address that? Because permitting begins with legislatures or federal agencies who set up guidelines, and obviously those communities don't have the wherewithal or the resources to prevent placements of a lot of those facilities there.
Right. It's, for me, the question is one of education. And so I think as lawyers, we tend to work in our silos, and we tend to do the things that we do and you know, focus on our narrow issues. But I think there also needs to be a bottom-up movement where lawyers are very much engaged in a conversation with communities around their rights and around the landscape. And the problem in Hawaii is that decisions are already being made that lock us into certain pathways, right? And so we are now, when we make investments in a smart grid, which is not a bad thing, but when we make investments in a 20-year project, that's done, right? And for the next 20 years, we are dealing with that. So the ex-ante engagement and education, I think, is important. And communities, we need more lawyers from communities that are impacted by development. So we have that dialogue. And we need more bridge builders, I think, as well. So programs like the Energy Justice Program that I'm trying to get off the ground is a bridge between communities and regulators and policymakers. So there has to be more conversation happening and more education, I think. so that folks know what they can do, and then they take it on, right? They carry the water for justice. It's not, we can plant the seeds as lawyers and we can educate and understand, but at some point it becomes the community's role to shape their future. Melissa, you had a question.
Yes, so going back to the food question, how realistic is it to avoid the land use conflict by getting renewables from the ocean waves?
Meaning, does looking more to ocean resources help us avoid that?
Yes, and is it do we have the technology today to do that? And does that also avoid the intermittency of solar because we have constant wave action?
Yeah, so there is a pilot wave energy project that has said it's successful, but I don't know if they can scale it up in order to meet the energy needs. This is a project, I think it was a joint DoD project, and the University of Hawaii was working on it. The offshore wind issue, though, is interesting. Recently, the island of Oahu was approached for several offshore wind developments. However, the windiest places that they identified were either in a very affluent part of the island on the eastern side, or the North Shore and west side. So Waianae is a very low-income area, traditionally marginalized community. I think they would say that as well. And North Shore is somewhat affluent, but has a little bit more political capital. But anyway, the other proposal for offshore wind development was at the nexus of those two communities, which is one of the most sacred places in Hawaii, Kaena Point, where the Native Hawaiians believe that our souls go after we die. So, and where is the proposal focused? It's actually focused on that part. So there will be offshore wind development, I'm almost certain, probably within 10 years. However, the process of getting there is really important. So it's procedural justice. I didn't go into kind of breaking down a lot of what energy justice is, but it's also about process. I think what Sherry was saying in the back about how do we engage communities. So the offshore wind piece could help to solve some of our problems. We have companies from Denmark and Germany coming over to sell us that, but we must engage Native Hawaiian communities. We must engage communities in some form of different ownership models, right? In order to have them buy into this idea of littering their, I mean, this is how they would frame it, littering their sea with offshore wind. And then of course the cable question then is attached to that, right? How do we, if we say, well, it's not gonna be Oahu, it's gonna be Molokai or Maui housing most of the offshore wind, how do we get that power to where all of the users are, which is in Oahu? And is that a fair way to distribute the burdens, right? Should the Native Hawaiian community in Molokai have to generate power so that we can fly people in from Japan and China to use natural resources? I mean, it's just, this is the debate that's happening, and there are a lot of competing interests there. We have to talk about it, though. We have to raise these issues, I think, the justice piece, I think, and that as we move forward. Last question. I know people have to leave. Maybe you should come down and, because I don't want to hold people hostage. So thank you so much. It was great to be here. I'm here for the next week and a half. If you want to chat, I'm happy to do so. So thanks for being here.